There you go. That's what's happened so far and in recent months. Alan Farrell is here from Fine Gael, and we also have Eddie Hobbs from Renewa. Alan, come to you first. We heard today that 51% of people have paid. It just doesn't make it a legitimate entity, though, does it, if only half of the people are paying?
I wouldn't agree at this stage. I think it's quite a reasonable amount of progress made on a new utility, which is setting itself up. 1.8 million customers, starting from scratch. We've seen a similar stage in the process in the household charge, where I understand the figures were somewhere in the region of 30%.
Well, we have two bills now, haven't we, issued?
That's right. Well, we are only in the middle of the second billing period, so the figures on that are not available. They won't be available until the end of October. But certainly the figures thus far have been relatively encouraging. 51% of people have registered and paid.
Nothing happens.
And another 25% of the Irish population are already paying for water.
Isn't the problem, though, that nothing happens to you if you don't pay? If you decide not to pay, it actually makes no odds.
No, quite the contrary. I mean, the government have put in place...
What are the penalties?
The Miscellaneous Provisions Bill of the Environment Act, which effectively allows for payments to have a surcharge of €30 placed on them after 12 months. And ultimately will lead to Irish Water, if such a person refuses to pay or does not enter into engagement with Irish Water in terms of a payment plan.
So after 12 months after the first, because we haven't heard this before, this is all new. So after the first 12 months...
The billing cycle will incur, if they refuse to pay that, there will be a charge of €30 applied. Plus, if the person is not registered with Irish Water, they do not qualify for their conservation grant.
Okay, so is it after a year or after? We'll just be respectful. We'll come to the audience in a moment. Just want to let Alan speak first.
The person will pay an additional €130 above what they should be paying if they were to
because
register.
They won't get their conservation grant. But as it stands at the moment, if you don't pay your water bill, you can still get your conservation grant. I mean, that's a bit of a joke, isn't it?
But ultimately, the person will still be charged. The person will still end up paying more over a period of time if they continue to refuse to pay their bill.
Okay.
And ultimately, also it should be said that if that bill goes above €500, there are opportunities for Irish Water to take the matter to the courts.
Just on the conservation grant issue, so you have Irish Water sending out the bills, and then you have a whole other set of administrators dealing in the Department of Social Protection with the conservation grant. Is that not just crazy stuff?
Well, no, because the conservation grant is there not as an aid to a person paying their water bill, but in fact as an aid to conserving more water. I mean, I was out in Portmarnock canvassing this evening, and a lady mentioned to me that she had spent a considerable amount of money investing in water harvesting products, butts
with
and
her
things like that.
With the €100?
No, not with the money, but she's saying that she did it on the basis that she would be receiving the money.
So you're trusting every other household to say, oh, when I get my €100 from the department, I'm going to use it for water conservation?
But this is something that I think every citizen in this state, if they're getting something towards the cost of saving water, ultimately reducing their own bill and water consumption within their community or whatever it might be, well then clearly it's an opportunity for that person to expend a little bit of money within their community.
Okay, so while you take that gamble and that bet, the taxpayer is paying two sets of administrators to collect the water charge and then to give the €100 back.
There's no additional staff being taken on with the Department of Social Protection to administer this. The staff within Irish Water are being funded through the activities of Irish Water. 50% of the 730,000 people who have been water metered in the last 23 months.
The staff who are doing the administration of the grant, what were they doing before this?
Those individuals are actually beating the cap at the moment, which means they're being charged less than the 260. And they're in a multi-person household.
And do you know what those... I mean, you say there's no additional staff, but I'm just wondering what the staff who are now spending their time administrating this €100 water conservation grant, what were they doing before this?
I'm afraid you'd have to ask the Minister or the Department of Social
Protection. But do you see what I'm saying? We're using all of this manpower to give money back to people, more in fact, than they're paying. Some of them are not paying at all.
Of course, Claire, it's going to cost money to set up a new utility, and a utility that is addressing the fact that we haven't invested properly in water infrastructure in this country for 50 years.
I mean, what do you honestly think? I mean, do you think Irish Water is a bit of a...
I honestly believe that it is a necessary evil to ensure that the water infrastructure in this country is capable of meeting not just the demands of households, but also the demands of businesses.
That's the theory around it, but just in terms of how we've done this and how we're doing it.
Setting up in certain areas because of the infrastructural deficits.
Do you think this is the best way to do it, the way we're doing it right now?
I haven't heard a credible alternative to the establishment.
But even
of Irish
Enda Kenny
Water.
has said, I heard him in his interview at Your Thinking saying that the system needed to be changed. He didn't say how it needed to be changed. I mean, do you agree with him, and have you any ideas?
We had 31 separate local authorities expending approximately 50% more on the administration of the infrastructure over the last 12 months. The Irish Water
So you think this system, the way it is configured now, is the right one?
Absolutely do.
Eddie, you want to charge for water at Renew as well?
Well, on a completely different basis. Well, firstly, I mean, to suggest that that this is going to work, I don't think it's credible. I mean, it's a bit like, it reminded me of Comical Ali, you know, when the Americans were invading and he was saying that the Americans aren't here, it's a myth, and you could see the Abraham tanks in the background coming through the palm trees. If you get 50% non-compliance, it's game over.
But you get 50% compliance on the other side.
It's game over, right? Because the Irish people are saying, we're not having this. So
50% of them are paying, Eddie, and you can't ignore that.
50% are not paying. And so we have to ask ourselves why. Now, one of the things that's common to both sides of the audience is the universal fear that we're being stitched up for a potential sale of our water down the road if Ireland were to go through another chaotic crisis period, right? And that's a real fear. And that ought to be addressed. And the way you address that, and it's not being discussed enough, is that in the 1922 Constitution, the Irish people, the people that are not complying, own their natural resources, including water. And in the 37 Constitution, it was moved to the state, the establishment, away from the Irish people. So the Irish people...
So move it back to the people.
The Irish people don't own their own assets.
But who would run it then? If you go back to the Irish people owning water, who runs it?
Well, there's two issues. Firstly, you change the ownership back to the Irish people because the Irish people don't trust the state.
Yeah, OK, you've gone that, but
right?
who
That's
runs it?
That's the first thing under Article 10. The second thing, then, in my opinion, what you need to do is you need to scrap Irish Water as it stands, which is what we're saying, set up a brand new utility, having consulted the people on it, and then deal with the real problem, which is that for at least 30, 40, 50 years, we have underinvested in our infrastructure to the tune of 7 billion. We are in breach of 4 different EU directives on sewage and water.
But you replace Irish Water with this utility. Do you care whether it's a private company running that utility?
Well, 1 second now. We have to be very careful here now. If Article 10 is changed, and the ownership of the water is back with the Irish people.
Yes, of the resource, but the management of the
asset of the water is back with the Irish people, not the state. Then you have an operational company running the water on behalf of the Irish people.
So it could be a private company.
Sold. It could be anybody that does the job well.
Okay. Well,
and is not a backroom deal stitched up.
But sure, if you have a private company running the resource, which belongs, they could charge what they want for it.
No, not necessarily, because you've had lousy oversight by the Commission for Energy Regulation, which is a parallel issue. But the bottom line is this: whoever can pay for water doesn't pay for it. That has to be, because that's only socially just. Those that can pay for it on a basis that declines over time as it becomes more efficient, if this is done properly. But the bottom line is this: people, in my opinion, the people that were against Irish Water from the start are those that can pay because they simply can pay, and those that can pay because they saw the quango for what it was, which was an insult to the Irish people.
Okay,
it was
let's hear from some members of our audience now. We're going to hear from those who haven't paid and are not going to pay, and those who have paid. Maybe we'll go to our won't pays first, over on this side. Gentleman there in the front row with your hand raised. Go ahead there, your point, please.
Well, I've just heard Alan give us a lot of statistics. But in my view, I have a very big problem with that, because I can't really believe a word out of his mouth.
Well, why haven't you paid? Just very specifically.
If I may, I'll tell you why. His government was elected on a mandate to oppose austerity, to oppose water charges and privatisation. This is what they said they'd do. They got into government and they did precisely the opposite. They are a government.
I don't think Fine Gael ever said they weren't bringing in. They never promised they weren't.
This is a government without a mandate. This is not a democracy.
They never promised that during the last election that they weren't going to bring in water charges.
The government was elected to oppose austerity. Water charges are a serious austerity, quite apart from the fact that they're theft.
And gentleman behind you with a hand raised, yeah.
Two points really. One is, the Irish people pay for water, back in the 80s, income tax was increased by 2%, so to cover water charges. In 1997, when they tried to introduce water rates, the people rebelled against that. So they increased VAT by 2% and car tax by 5%.
Okay, so
Now
you
they
say
have- now they have
say we're already paying for it. Well, what do you say to the 50% of people who have decided to pay their Irish water bill?
Well, all that I can say to them is, if you went into a shop to buy any product and you paid once for it, and then the shopkeeper said pay again, and again, and again, and again, you're very silly.
Okay, we'll come back to you in a moment, but I want to come over to this side now for a moment and to some people who have paid. Who has paid? And you want to tell me why? There's a lady there right in the middle of the second row. Tell me why you have paid.
I don't like paying. Nobody likes paying their bills. I don't like paying the bin charges either. But it's, as a behaviour modification, it really works. I recycle absolutely everything now. If you're going to have, you can't improve what if you don't measure, you can't improve. If you're not metering, if you're not, watching what amount of water you're using, and it covers sewage as well. How are you ever going to, are we going to let the kids stay in the shower for half an hour? Are you going to watch your neighbour washing their cars, watering the gardens? A conservation grant is going to make you think about harvesting rainwater.
So you think it will work from a conservation point of view?
So. I don't
Okay,
believe
no,
if
just
people,
let her
obviously,
speak.
if people can't afford it, and people are to the pin of their collars an awful lot, and we all know Irish water has been a bit of a mess from the start, but the principle of paying for your consumption, I think, is a real incentive for the green issue. That would be my argument.
Thank you. There's a gentleman behind you there with his hand raised. Sir.
All the parties involved in the creation of Irish water have nothing to be proud of. It has been a shambles from start to finish. But as the old cliche says, we are where we are. We need to conserve water, which has been lost in the... Alan's point that this €100 is to conserve water. The only way to conserve anything is let the user pay for what the user uses.
We do pay.
And I am perfectly happy to pay for what I use. If I could just mention my granddaughter, when this was initially introduced, my granddaughter, who was 10 at the time, devised a way to save water when she was brushing her teeth.
Okay.
Not a new idea.
Okay. And back over, we have lots of people who want to get in on this side. We might come to the front row. Gentleman in the very front row, we'll just get a microphone to you. Go ahead.
In response to that lady's comment on both the points, first regarding, how measuring has made you, cut down on your consumption. I think that has got nothing to do with measurement first. It has got to do with awareness, as simple as that. I mean, if you're aware that water is scarce, or let's say that recycling is good, you will do it. I mean, why do you have to pay for it? Secondly, when it comes to the matter of principle, don't you realize that water being a necessity, if you put a tax on it, if you put a tax on anything in principle, you're creating a divide between the rich and the poor.
Okay,
when you put it on a necessity, it is going down the wire, poor are at a disadvantage.
Thank you. And the gentleman behind you.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that contrary to what Fine Gael have said, right, I'm one of the people who's working. I've paid my USC, I paid my local property tax, and I was promised that 80% of that would go to local services. Instead, 480 million of that went to Irish water, right? I've paid. Now, the man here said that his daughter came up with an idea that would actually make him save water, right? She didn't need Irish water. I presume she did that before Irish water. Irish water has nothing to do with conservation.
What is it?
Right?
I mean, you're in... Okay. I mean, it's interesting that you say I pay all of my other taxes, and I think you're saying I don't really have a problem paying the rest of them. But what is it about this one that gets you?
Right. What gets me is basically the condescension and the insults and the slander for Irish people, right? Because I'm working, right? I'm in the ridiculous situation where if I paid Irish water, it would be €80, right? On the other hand, I would get a grant for €100. That is ridiculous. But I'm saving this man money. I'm saving him money. And he is turning around, and Alan Kelly is saying to me that I am somehow pulling a fast one, right? Now,
If you claim your conservation
Now,
right,
it's-
I mean,
but
can I
Claire-
just ask
Claire,
this
it's illegal
side
to
of the
just- one
audience,
second.
is there anybody over here who is obviously not going to pay, because we know you're not going to pay, but is anybody going to claim the conservation grant?
I'm not. Can I just clarify one thing?
No one.
Yeah.
Could I just speak for a second?
Okay, there's a man behind you there, and I know you've been trying to get in for...
Sorry, Claire, could I just say, water is a basic human right. It's a necessity, okay? Now, there should be public ownership of water. And by that fact, it should be enshrined, let me finish, it should be enshrined in our constitution. Now, whenever one of these politicians all say, the EU, right, prohibits monopolisation of all state services, including the water services, okay? Water is a basic human right. Now, what they want to do is to make water a privilege.
Okay.
And a commodity.
Okay, I'm going to move on over here. There's a gentleman on this side with his hand raised. Yes, and you've paid your water charges.
Well, you know, I suppose they say water is a basic human right. For an awful lot of rural dwellers out there, the infrastructure isn't in place for water. They've had to invest either privately or in group schemes to source water. And, you know, until there's a fairness and a full infrastructure nationally, I think, you know, the water scheme certainly isn't providing for all citizens.
So are you a customer of Irish Water then, or do you
Yes.
have your own scheme? Or?
I sunk my own well because the scheme was simply inadequate, wholly inadequate. But the reality of it is that rural dwellers out there find themselves for years with inadequate water supplies. Now they find that post office is closed, their local Garda barracks closed, their health service downgraded. The people of rural Ireland that are disadvantaged have been more and more disadvantaged day by day.
Maybe Alan Farrell, this is about more than water charges.
Of course, I certainly think, and I wouldn't disagree with a comment that was made earlier. I mean, you know, the establishment of Irish Water from a political perspective has been difficult, to say the least. But from an infrastructural perspective, and as I said already, it is a necessary evil. It is a facility that we need to ensure provides a product which is fit for human consumption to every household across the country and every business across the country who are paying a very significant amount of money towards that particular service. You know, we have instances where companies are looking to relocate in Ireland who are large consumers of water and have simply been unable to do so because of those problems. Doubts over the provision of water.
How much is Irish Water going to cost us this year? Because Micheál Martin said in the Dáil that it would cost 70 million.
The billing, the administrative cost, I understand, is somewhere in the region of 22.
As in we would make a loss of 70 million
Not
this
that
year.
I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. I am aware that Irish Water over a 3-year period are putting in 1.4 billion in investment in infrastructural projects over, I think it's 386 projects.
When you take the grant versus what's coming in.
Well, Irish Water are not administering the grant. That is something that's been given by the government.
Separate. Eddie, you want to come back in there?
Look, the whole financial model behind Irish Water is broken now. I mean, it's quite obvious because of the non-compliance. So you may as well get real about it. The second thing is that this is a public health issue, water. It always has been. We've ignored 4 major EU directives, and we need, as a people, to pump about 7 billion into infrastructure and water in order to bring it up to first world standards.
How are we going to pay for that?
Yeah, well, what we've got to do is, what we have to do is not go your way. We've got to start again, in my opinion.
Starting with another utility,
we're going to have to start
investing
again.
7 billion of taxpayers'
Sorry, can I finish,
money.
please, Alan?
How do you propose
Alan, sorry,
to get
I didn't.
the money?
Well, I'll answer the question if you stop interrupting me. Is that okay? Are we okay with that? What you've got to do is you've got to go to the Irish people who are divided on this issue with a new entity that's transparent, that's not a smoky backroom deal done with no notes, and go to them with something that you believe may work. And if it doesn't work, you've got to go as far, in my opinion, you're going to have to go to some kind of a referendum, because we have a situation where 50% will not pay. And no matter how far you drive down with your ludicrous conservation grant of €100, like Groucho Marx politics, it's not going to work, and it's going to go right through the next general election, and it's going to get worse, because what Irish Water is, and we all know it, it's HSE Mark II all over again.
What do you say to that, Alan Farrell?
It's very difficult to take anything coherent from what Eddie's saying. I mean, in the first instance, he said he wants to remove Irish Water and then establish a new water utility, which is effectively another Irish Water called something else, without any basic arithmetic behind how it's going to be financed.
In keeping with the PwC report in 2011 which your government ignored.
You know, the figure that Eddie has given us, which is 7.1, I mean, where is that 7.1 going to come from?
But you
I mean,
are
at the
saying,
moment, we're talking about a 3-year investment
can I just
programme.
come back to you? Because you are saying, scrap this utility. We know so much money has been spent on it, whether you think it's perfect, whether you think it's not perfect. I mean, do we not fix what we have as opposed to going back to the drawing board?
No, I think you need an asset transfer to a new entity set up on a basis where you go and properly consult the Irish people and get their permission to do it in that direction.
Eddie,
because otherwise
what would that cost to do all that?
Well, no, because the costs have already been borne. It's a straightforward asset transfer to another entity. And
same staff, presumably.
No, that's where we differ, right?
Okay. So you
stood over a backroom deal.
So there will be a cost.
Without notes,
well, come on now,
between
be
30
honest.
county councils.
There will be a cost involved.
Of course there's a cost. There's 7 billion.
Well, you said a moment ago there wouldn't be.
No,
so
I
there
didn't
will
say
be a
that.
cost
No,
involved.
there's going to be a cost for infrastructure of 7 billion. That's going to have to be borrowed and put in by the next government or the government after that. Meanwhile, the Irish people pay for the operational costs of the water, exempting those that can't pay. And we've got to go to them with something that will work, that they will accept. Because this idea of driving forward where you are is ludicrous.
Okay,
it's absurd. It's not going
we've
to
time
work.
for one more voice from either side. Lady in the green top, I know you've been wanting to get in for a while.
You asked where would we get the money? A financials tax of 0.5% would fix all the pipes and we'd have Irish water there. That's where you get the money. You heard people here mentioning about Apple, Google, about their taxes. Why do you keep on taking from people that haven't got it at all? And I just want to come in on Irish Water's statement about people moved away, some people moved away from their direct debit. Why would anybody move away from the direct debit by paying their second bill? As far as I'm concerned, you said that because the people that were going to pay their second bill didn't pay it.
All right, a raised hand over on this side. Yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
First of all, I'm here on a technicality because my husband paid the bill. My heart is actually over there. I think one of the big problems that has been with Irish Water also is the question of timing. The so-called recovery in the economy, of which the government is so proud, actually belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to the government. We are the ones that made the huge cuts to our own lifestyles and our own lives in order to facilitate the recovery. And I think where the government went completely wrong was bringing in Irish Water as the last of a whole raft of taxes.
Anyone else on this side who has paid or who will pay, who would like to respond to what you heard from those who won't? Yes, sir, you in front of our last speaker.
Yeah. I am one of 50% of the country who have paid. The opponents of it speak for the 100%. They claim figures, they claim a mandate on behalf of the entire country. 50% of the country are just as angry as they are. We're angry because we're carrying them on our backs. And the democracy.
Okay. All right. Well, look, we asked. All right. Respectful is what we said we would be. We asked our Claire Byrne Live. We're just going to carry on. We asked our Claire Byrne Live and Morrick Research panel about this, about paying water bills. The question we asked was: have you or your household paid, or do you plan to pay your Irish water bill? And the results are yes 50%, no 40%, and don't know 10%, which ties in with those figures from Irish Water. Well, Hugh O'Connell is with us now from the Journal. Hugh, you're very welcome. Thanks for being with us. What are the political implications of a poll result like that? We're heading into election period, not quite sure when it's going to be. But if 40% of people, a hugely sizable number of people, according to our poll, maybe 50% according to the figures that they stand at the moment, won't pay this charge, what does it mean for government?
Well, I think politically the government has lost this issue. It lost it a long time ago. I mean, this is a controversy which has rumbled on since January of last year. So they're not going to win on this issue. The only thing that they can hope for is it doesn't get any worse, and that perhaps, as they hope will happen, they get a compliance rate of about 60% by the time of the general election. Maybe it might get above that, might be less than that. But I think politically for the government, this is a toxic issue which has really damaged them over the last year and a half. And I think what this poll is also saying, and what the compliance rate at the moment is also saying, is that this is going to be a huge issue for the next government, whichever government that is. You know, there's obviously the opposition parties are pledging to abolish Irish water, get rid of water charges. The government is sticking with this plan. There will be no divergence from this plan as far as the government is concerned, but it's going to be a huge issue in the next Dáil as well.
It certainly is, and we saw that tonight. I also wanted to ask you about our earlier poll question. 89% of people saying that they don't believe Gerry Adams when he says he was not a member of the IRA. What's the significance of that? Is there a significance there?
Well, it's not surprising. Previous polls have shown that most people don't believe Gerry Adams when he says he was never in the IRA. I suppose the result itself, 9 out of 10 people, is pretty stunning. But I think that the follow-on question from that, I think, was in relation to whether it mattered. And it was a sort of almost a 50-50 split between voters who thought it does matter and voters who thought it doesn't. I think ultimately...
Just to let people know, we did ask as a follow-up question, does it matter to you whether Gerry Adams was ever a member of the IRA? 47% said yes, 45% said no, and 8% don't know.
So it's effectively a split almost in people who do believe and people who don't believe, an even enough split. And I think that from Sinn Féin's point of view, the fact that it does matter to a significant proportion of voters out there is a problem for them. And I think that electorally for Sinn Féin, there will always be a barrier to them perhaps getting, you know, the number of seats they might need to form a government or to get an overall majority, because Gerry Adams is their leader and he is so politically divisive.
All right, more on this on the journal.ie?
Absolutely.
All right, Hugh, thank you very much for being with us. We're going to take a quick look at tomorrow's front pages now, starting with the Irish Times. It leads with a story there on the EU's free travel rules, which are now apparently in doubt as countries introduce border checks to cope with the migrant refugee crisis. The Examiner too carrying that angle, reporting that refugee crisis to worsen as borders are shut, and the Irish Sun runs with miracle as 52 school children survive a school bus crash that happened this morning in County Cork. I'm joined now by Una Butler,